Well, the concept that I develop is very much similar to what you call foreign aid curse or oil curse. So if you use the concept foreign aid curse, it's afflicted several countries. As you know, all those countries that receive a large chunk of their money through foreign aid. That include African countries, Latin American countries, even some Asian countries. But when it comes to this particular concept, geostrategic curse, the number is small. Those that are very much part of the great power system or part of the Cold War, during the Cold War alliance system, were afflicted by it. So I have some 3 cases I have put forward that include Pakistan, Egypt, of course, Afghanistan, another case would be, and then the Philippines under the Marcos regime. But then some countries have received considerable aid from the United States, especially for being allies, but they have turned that into a blessing. This is the contrast. And that include Israel, Korea, and Taiwan, and even Turkey and Indonesia, cases that prove that foreign aid can be turned it into a different sort of relationship. Why Pakistan has not become a developmental state is my focus in the book, where I argue that unlike these other cases of US allies that benefited because they engage in intense trade with the United States, and they also put money into education for all the developmental aspects. Pakistan, unfortunately, and Egypt have not done some of those basic requirements for transforming a great relationship with a superpower into a positive economic turn. And this is why the comparison I provide in the book later on will show that what was missing in the Pakistani context. And even today, it seems to be a curse rather than a blessing, because they're not putting the money into where it should be: education, technical education, industrial development, infrastructure development, and of course, developing larger links with all neighbors as well as other countries of the world. Well, that is an interesting dimension. In this book, I do not put only the blame on the structural or the larger international system and the conflict relationship with the great powers. Agency plays a big role in my discussion. You need a grand strategy to make use of your opportunity provided by this larger structural conflict. And in Pakistan's case, that agency has been the military, or to some extent civilian sometimes, but military-led regimes. And that agency has unfortunately focused too much on military aspects of relationship, not economic aspects, not developmental aspects. So although they blame for external reasons for where they are today, the choices they made on many occasions led to this downward spiral. In the 1950s and 60s, Pakistan was on a forward-looking posture. They had a good economic development. Even their model was considered as superior to Korea. And they were richer than Korea, South Korea I'm talking about. But why did it become a different path? Because the elite chose different kind of solutions to internal problems, such as the conflict with the Bengalis or East Pakistan, or even external relations with India, starting wars in '65 and then going on to acquiring nuclear weapons. Obviously, the Indian behavior is part of the explanation. But then in '71, you have this war, which they are facilitating. Obviously, the Indian intervention was necessary. But worst of all was the Soviet invasion and how they reacted to that. Now, one can argue that the Soviet invasion was beyond their control. The American military and ISI, CIA were all helping to create this ISI and the Mujahideen forces. But one can also see the introduction of certain laws and certain policies by Zia-ul-Haq purely for his or the particular group's ideological beliefs. They are not necessarily based on what I call prudential ideas of statecraft. So then they're using once the war was over, the same elements for fighting various wars in Kashmir and other parts of the world. And then the Taliban takes over with Pakistan's support. These are choices they made Whatever be the explanation for those choices, the choices are haunting them today because the same forces are fighting back Pakistan. They want to turn it into an Islamic emirate. And so the state is struggling to contain them. At the same time, elements of the states are maintaining the links to some of these forces in Afghanistan, for instance, to have a kind of say in the control over that poor, war-ravaged country. So these are choices they are making, and to blame the rest of the world for their situation is sometimes a little too much, I think. We need to think of these two forces working, but what choices you make as leaders to transform your country, or you want to use opportunities for narrow goals defined by a particular set of elite. Pakistan cannot survive on this foreign aid coming in during different crisis times. Right now there is a big IMF grant given. US has given money, China has given money, Saudi Arabia has given money. Mostly grants, some of them are aid, of course they have to be repaid. This is not the way to manage your economy. You need to become part of the global economic order. Globalize in the right way. Pakistan is globalized in the wrong way. That's my argument in the book. In order to do that, Pakistan has to open up for economic trade. Pakistan has to build industries. Pakistan has to start off by creating technical institutions, educating its youth in science and technology, not in the archaic madrasas and ideas that really don't help in the 21st century. Pakistan has to use its alliance relationships not for weapons and military goods alone, especially with China and Saudi Arabia, use them for building an economy, a powerful economy that can trade with the rest of the world and with its neighboring countries, especially India. It cannot continue in this path of very isolated with respect to the economic order. And so Pakistan has a long way to go, but they have to start somewhere. And that somewhere should be education, somewhere should be creating different economic zones, export-oriented infrastructure, of course, and not to play with this non-state actor business. The non-state actors don't always play by Pakistan's rules or the goals set by the elite. This is a kind of a difficult thing to control them once you let them go on their way. So Pakistan has a very difficult trajectory. Elite is trying to some extent, the civilian rulers, especially Nawaz Sharif, but there are enough forces to spoil efforts within and without. And so here Pakistan has to make some bold decisions. And the military and the ISI have to agree to abide by the civilian rule. Civilians are still not in complete control. It's kind of, I call it a hybrid democracy, because the military has veto over key issues, national security, peace with India, peace in Afghanistan, or nuclear weapons. So until the civilians assert, this is going to be a major challenge. And that may not happen anytime soon, but they have definitely made some progress. And let's hope it will continue. Well, the one major optimism, source of optimism is the transition that took place from President Zardari's party to the current Prime Minister's party. And that took place without a military rule in between, which is a very rare thing in the Pakistani history. But at the same time, they are also trying the ex-military chief, General Musharraf, for treason. Now the question is, it may sound like a major step for Pakistan, but if there is a trial and a conviction and some form of execution or something like that, that will dramatically alter the whole problem. Pakistan will have a serious military revolt, because the military, I'm sure, doesn't want to see its general put through the gallows. So I think they will try and probably send him abroad. Now, this is actually an interesting transition. Never in the history an ex-military chief could be tried. And so that is an interesting transition. The Pakistani media, despite enormous challenges they face, journalists are getting killed on a daily basis there. They are reporting, they are stubbornly writing things. And there is a civil society, tiny but emerging, which is actually happening in a kind of middle class, small middle class growing. But that middle class needs better education, better information, and not judging on the basis of hearsays and conspiracy theories. That is a big challenge. That's why information and debate and exchange of ideas, proper diagnosis. So that's why my book is an effort to encourage people to think. It is not to blame them or to put them under a kind of bad look, The idea is that social scientists have a role to play here. There are excellent books on Pakistan by journalists showing Pakistan is doing this thing, that thing. One title of book is called The Magnificent Delusions, the U.S. relations with Pakistan. Another book is called The Wrong Enemy. Both are excellent books, but they don't explain why it is the way it is. And social scientists have ignored this country. Some Pakistanis do, but on a very narrow level of analysis. So we need more works that show that the path they have taken have led to this process, kind of path dependency process. And that unless they change course, they're going to make things worse. It's not going to get better, especially in the area of nuclear weapons. They have a very interesting strategy now. They're acquiring a lot more weapons than is needed and trying to deploy tactical weapons, short-range missiles on the Indian border. And these are all very dangerous steps because of the crisis nature of this relationship. So they have to really go more careful and not to follow a kind of 19th century strategy, grand strategy of this intense national security state, which cannot compromise on anything, and expecting neighbors to make the compromises. Very unlikely the neighbors will make under threat of a gun. And so there is that mindset problem, which is partly why it is a garrison state, why it is this military-oriented warrior state I'm describing. And I think it is not to blame them, but to think alternate ways. It happened in other countries, in different countries. Like recently, Burma, the military gave up power. The military gave to civilians. That was never expected. You have Latin American countries, Chile, you have Brazil, Indonesia, and even Turkey, despite what's going on there, not necessarily very democratic. The point is that militaries sometimes adjust and accommodate. Of course, the civilians should also have ideas. They can also be driven by warrior state ideas and garrison state ideas. They should be willing to try more compromise and maybe alternate mechanisms for conflict resolution, internally and externally. And this is a challenge for them because some of the ethos are still shared by both. And these ethos are very hard to challenge. Obviously, there are all sorts of reasons for those. But sometimes leaders have to give peace a chance. And I think it is feasible. There are a lot of very smart people there. And I'm sure they will start looking at it. That the course of action they have been following for the last 66 years, although tactically have made them some successes, strategically have not in the long run. And this is why I'm encouraging them not to give up their territorial claims, but to engage in a different mode, a different style, become a strong economy like Korea did, and at the same time try to look at alternate conflict resolution mechanisms.